It's Thanksgiving 1989 and people are glued to their TVs. Just 2 weeks ago, on November 9th, the guards of the Berlin Wall opened the gates and thousands of people are crossing the border that kept two different worlds apart for decades. Something unimaginable grand is happening. The Eastern Bloc is crumbling, the Cold War is at its end, and a new era is fast approaching. But for 19-year-old Todd Scatini, none of that matters yet. He's in his hometown, Bakersfield, California, and he's in trouble. Todd just failed the classes in the community college and had to drop out. He crashed his car and now has to explain himself to his parents. Todd is at loss on how to proceed with his life. So he makes what will become the most important decision in his life. He enlists in the United States Army.
And from the very first day, I just fell in love with it. It was so cool. I remember it so vividly. The first day, we got to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri at about midnight on March 14th of 1990. And they shaved my head, gave me a new uniform. And, I just remember 4 o'clock in the morning running in formation with all of my new platoon mates in the Army who were going through basic training, all of us with our new haircuts. And it was pouring rain, like sideways rain, like Forrest Gump talks about. Pouring rain, and we were soaked. And we get in this mess hall, and I just look around and I was like, this is all right.
Lieutenant Colonel Todd Scatini became an integral part of the U.S. highest military and diplomatic circles. During these years, he worked in Belgium, Bosnia and Herzegovina, France, and Afghanistan, and learned 6 languages, including Russian, Czech, and German. He also gathered a collection of military paraphernalia and souvenirs from his vast travels. He keeps them in his office. One of them is a toy-sized shining bulava, a traditional Ukrainian weapon that looks a lot like a mace. After 27 years of service, Todd retired. He's a businessman who lives a normal civilian life in Kansas City, Missouri. But when the war in Ukraine started, he remembered his military experience and a long-forgotten idea reappeared. Now Todd has a plan. When the war is ended and reconstruction begins, one thing mustn't be overlooked, for it has tremendous potential. The thing that can revive Ukraine's economy is cannabis, specifically hemp. Hi, and welcome to Control Shift, a podcast by Libo Studio and product design agency Humble Team. My name is Anatoly Gromov and I'm your host. In this podcast, we discuss stories of professionals, their shifts, and most importantly, the difference they make in the world. Today, I'll tell you about a very unconventional idea that emerged at the intersection of foreign affairs and agriculture, military, and illegal substances. At first, this idea was turned down, but not forgotten. And after 10 years, it seems like the time has finally come to bring back one of the oldest and most versatile plants back to our lives. Todd Scatini enlisted in the Army a day after Thanksgiving 1989. He started his training as a signal interceptor for SIG-INT, a military body whose job is to gather intelligence from radio communications. It may sound like a start of a movie, Bone Desk style, but it was a notch more ordinary. He learned Czech and Slovak and received his initial Army training. After SIG and IT, Todd already knew that Army is the only career he wanted and decided to do it properly. He applied to the United States Military Academy in West Point, New York, arguably the most prestigious military education institute. Being accepted to West Point is like getting into an Ivy League school, and Todd got in.
It's such a privilege. And going to West Point, it really is a big part of who I am as a person because, it creates such incredible leaders. There's a real motto there that says, much of the history we teach was made by the people we taught. So there was real legacy in this place. I wanted to be a part of that.
West Point Academy made leaders throughout the United States since 1802. Presidents, generals, the cabinet secretaries. It was founded by Thomas Jefferson, president, a co-author of the Declaration of Independence, a prominent cannabis farmer, and rumored stoner. Todd finished his undergrad in West Point with a passion for cultures and languages, and was deployed to Germany, first as a cavalry platoon leader and later as a foreign area officer, a position that calls for both military training and talent for diplomacy. The career took off. In 2009, he joined the US Embassy in Bosnia and Herzegovina to assist in post-conflict reconstruction. Todd, his family, and their dog arrived on June 1928. On that day in 1389, the Battle of Kosovo between the Serbs and the Ottoman Empire took place. Serbs did not gain independence, yet they went down in history as ultimate patriots and heroes. A significant date for Balkanian nations that is remembered to this day.
So it was this really weird kind of moment that we arrived. To be in Sarajevo, a city, the capital city of Bosnia, that had been surrounded by snipers and anti-aircraft weapons that were pointed down into the city and destroyed tons of buildings. It was amazing. This was a decade after the war had been over. Well over a decade at that point. And we came in at night, so I didn't really notice as much. There were lights everywhere. It seemed kind of like a normal city. But then when we woke up in the day, I could look out my window and look across the street at a place that still had tons of bullet holes in it, all over.
When wars eventually end, they leave devastation and despair from the ground up. The soil and water sources are polluted. The crops and livestock are destroyed. The housing and infrastructure lay in ruins. Those who survived are displaced, diseased, traumatized, and grieving. Up to 80% of people in post-conflict zones end up impoverished and unhoused. Rebuilding a stable society in which a person can thrive is a big part of post-conflict reconstruction. It is not done fast and it is not easy. But when families and communities have been living in basements and under tarps for years on end, their priorities may not be the most appropriate long-term strategy. They simply want to get housed as fast as possible.
They're using substandard materials, lots of wood, lots of the drywall and things of that nature, and kind of being brought back in a shoddy way. Why would we rebuild with materials that are costly and quite poisonous and also prone to mold and mildew, which is a health hazard and prevents you from moving back in? Why wouldn't we rebuild in a manner that is, mold and mildew resistant, requires less energy to heat and cool, and, would be better for the planet?
Todd was certain. He must find a way to kill multiple birds with one stone, to find some unique material that is local and easy to produce. Something that can be used in construction immediately but with lasting, stable results. Todd spent 2 years in Bosnia searching for a solution, and actually one good idea popped up. But then he was offered an advisory post in Afghanistan and moved. Todd arrived to Afghanistan in 2011, at the 10th anniversary of the US war. That year, Osama bin Laden was captured and killed, but Taliban still controlled large parts of the country. The president of Afghanistan, Hamid Karzai, welcomed the outside help in rebuilding war-torn country, despite his disagreement with American colleagues. With time, his friendship with the States would get stale, to say the least. But in 2011, his government and NATO were fruitfully collaborating. For Todd, it was not the first time. He has already been here with the Belgians. Then the goal was to understand the fabric of the conflict better and learn how the country became the graveyard of empires. So Todd had a deep understanding of Afghanistan, its culture and history, and on top of that, gained major knowledge of the post-war reconstruction in Bosnia. Now he was uniquely positioned to think strategically about the economical development of the country. And it didn't go unnoticed. General John Allen, the commander of the International Security Assistance Forces, invited Todd to join his team and develop peacemaking strategies. It was the largest military coalition that ever existed, 50 nations and all of the NATO's allies. The scenario was similar to Bosnia. A country with unique cultural intersections was home to many communities that spoke different languages and had different views. Yet, all of them suffered from the aftermath of war action and were in desperate need of humanitarian help.
I arrived with more experience, and I was also moving into a position right next to the guy who is the commander of this entire thing. I mean, he's like the Eisenhower of Afghanistan, right? The whole coalition commander. And, I also had more experience from operating in an embassy at this point in time. I had just come from the U.S. Embassy in Sarajevo. And so I looked at this through a much larger kind of interagency lens, a much larger multinational lens. I understood things like diplomacy and information operations, military operations, and economics. So yeah, it was a different guy that showed up there. And then cannabis showed up. Yeah.
Cannabis, native to Afghanistan, is a pretty simple bush-like plant with a complicated history. There are two species of cannabis, Cannabis sativa and Cannabis indica. Sativa is a tall, bright green plant, sturdy enough to withstand the harsh environment of windy mountain regions. Sativa species are referred to as hemp. Indica loves soft weather. It is shorter and wider than sativa. And unlike sativa, indica has a high THC content, a psychoactive cannabinoid that makes cannabis such a popular recreational drug. People often call Cannabis indica marijuana. Humanity cultivated both hemp and marijuana since before civilizations existed. It was used in robes, textiles, paints, oils, cattle feed, spiritual ceremonies, and medicine. Egyptian kings were buried with it as a symbol of abundance and prosperity. In medieval China, it was used to treat insomnia, indigestion, and inflammation. Gutenberg's Bible was printed on hemp paper. Sails made of hemp flew over every European ship, and when Europeans started colonizing the Americas, hemp traveled with them. Nowadays, cannabis is prohibited for cultivation, distribution, and consumption in most countries, including Afghanistan. How come such a wonderful, multifaceted plant is outcasted by so many people? It started with the United States, the country that relied on hemp and kept scaling up its cultivation up until 1930. The biggest newspaper distributor in the country and an owner of multiple paper mills, William Hearst, could not stand the fact that hemp paper threatened his business empire. His friends, the DuPont family, the owners of the DuPont chemical conglomerate, just patented nylon, a material women's stockings are made of, but also a source for ropes, sails, tarps, and textiles. To get nylon into the big game, they needed hemp to be gone. Both found the answer to their problems in Harry Anslinger, the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He helped the businessman with an anti-cannabis campaign that would not bring any good in due course. Hearst, the owner of almost all yellow press in the country, got to publishing opinionated anti-cannabis pieces. The DuPonts were throwing money into lobbying. By 1937, the group drafted their Marijuana Tax Act and pushed it through Congress. The new tax declarations were hard to file, and the punishment for the law violation, years in prison, was disproportionate. It was too much trouble for farmers, and hemp production rapidly diminished. But Harry Anslinger was just starting his intense, years-long campaign against marijuana and black and Latino people who allegedly corrupted white youth with the drug. He traveled all around the states and gave passionate speeches, mostly at churches and women's clubs, about the dangers marijuana and who smoke it presented. Convincingly, he provided police reports about men, mostly of color, convicted of assault with a knife and women who got assaulted after smoking weed. All 187 of those reports he had on file were falsified.
Southern trees bear strange fruit.
When Billie Holiday recorded and performed Strange Fruit, an anti-racist, anti-segregation song about lynching of black people in the south of the country, he went after her. The persecution of Billie Holiday, who suffered from drug misuse, continued for years and contributed to her diminished health and untimely death. Harry Anslinger was successful in marginalizing whole demographics through anti-weed polemics in his own country and moved on to the international scene. As the US representative to the United Nations Narcotics Control Board, he made sure that many other countries followed this suit. Hemp, a non-psychoactive type of cannabis, was often included in the prohibition. Todd's stepdad, the sheriff, was Mexican-American. A large Latino farming community in Bakersfield, his hometown, had always swarmingly embraced Todd. When he learned the story of how cannabis was prohibited, it hit the nerve.
It was really perplexed me how a place that could claim to be so welcoming and so such a cultural melting pot that we would have the prohibition of a single plant and that it could impact communities of color so heavily. It hit me heavily. It was. I mean, even in, Dr. Michelle Alexander, she wrote a book called The New Jim Crow. And in that book, she talks about cannabis prohibition. She said this is the most un-American policy since slavery. And I'd have to agree. In the land of the free, we've incarcerated so many people under this drug war. And I feel like we've ripped the futures away from people and whole communities for a really long time.
Another important thing. Todd's grandfather was a farmer, so Todd knew the ins and outs of farming and its role in a country's prosperity. And when it comes to cannabis, its agricultural potential is unprecedented. It's the second fastest growing sustainable crop after bamboo, and it is ridiculously versatile. And what's more important, Afghanistan is uniquely positioned to cultivate it. At that time, there were 3 established industries that could potentially bring money to Afghanistan: opium, minerals, and cannabis. The first one would be of no use for Todd and his colleagues, the second was already under Chinese control, and the third was largely controlled by Taliban. Todd decided to take a risk and dived into researching cannabis. What if NATO helps Afghanistan transition from production of cannabis indica to hemp industry that can be a source of all sorts of things, from building materials to protein, and simultaneously strip Taliban of its earnings?
So I thought, this is genius, man.
But General Allen's plan to support Afghanistan in using local resources was unconventional as it is. Subsidies and humanitarian aid were a more familiar and more orthodox way to pursue. It was something that the Soviets tried to do before, and that was the US strategy in Colombia. But Todd tried pitching anyway.
And, we were kind of batting around ideas around our little office space. And, I made this proposal and everyone was just like, okay, Cheech and Chong, who's next? Who's got a better idea? And we just moved on. But it was really the spark for me.
The more he researched, the more he believed that cannabis was the unique local material that can help nations recover and prosper. It's sustainable and easy to grow. You can use it as a protein-rich food source. You can plant hemp to remove heavy metals from former battlefields. You can print textbooks on it. And cannabis could also be a solution for the housing problem he was battling in Bosnia. On top of everything, you can make bricks out of it. He kept his research going for the rest of his army service. When he was back to Europe, he spoke about the potential that cannabis has with his colleagues and country's leaders. When it was time to retire, Todd already knew what he was going to do next. It's been 5 years since Lieutenant Colonel Schettini was discharged from the army. He is now a chairman of Blue Diamond Ventures, a holding company that provides cannabis compliance services. He is a public speaker and an advocate for recognizing cannabis as medicine and an equity opportunity.
I'm trying to create my dream job, which was really my old job, but my old job where I get to talk a lot more about weed and use cannabis as well. I really loved being a diplomat. I love working in the multinational community. The international community just fascinates me. I think I have the ability to influence it, or perhaps I'm fooling myself. I would like to have the ability to influence it. And the way I do it is just simply through talk and engage in conversations with people whose hopefully I can spark and capture their imagination, right? That's really the idea. Have a recognition of the opportunity that cannabis brings to the world, to individuals, to the military, to our society, because there is a huge societal shift taking place.
This is Shum by a Ukrainian band Gaway, the finalist of the Eurovision 2021. The song is based on a Ukrainian folklore song that calls for spring to come. Sowing hemp plants, sowing green ones, come spring, come, don't wait around, we'll go outside to love each other. Ukraine, the breadbasket of Europe, has a rich agricultural history, and you can't really tell it without mentioning hemp. The people who inhabited modern Ukraine in the Bronze Age cultivated and used cannabis for household needs, as medicine, and as a part of spiritual rituals. By the end of the 19th century, hemp made in Russian Empire accounted for 40% of the total hemp production in Europe. In Soviet Ukraine, about 250,000 acres of industrial hemp were grown yearly, more than cotton or sugar beets. But in the second part of the 20th century, just like in many other places in the world, Ukrainian production of hemp drastically shrunk. By the 2000s, only 10,000 acres of hemp crops were cultivated, and things aren't looking up. When Russia invaded the country in February this year, a full-on demolition of infrastructure started, and fertile Ukrainian fields became the arena for bloodshed and pollution. Intimately familiar with Eastern European geopolitics and economies, Todd's interest in hemp as a part of post-war reconstruction rekindled.
As I was watching the war unfold in Ukraine, and then beginning to understand how much wheat they produced for the rest of the world and how that had been held hostage and blocked off and really impacted the world, I recognized this was a major agricultural powerhouse country in Ukraine, and very likely both the soils being destroyed and depleted, very likely the infrastructure where this wheat is being processed is being destroyed. Same time in the background, right? Not that Ukraine has a huge experience now with hemp already, but the idea is to rebuild the agricultural infrastructure of Ukraine in a manner where the processing of hemp, I mean, every bit of it, right? The flower, the seed, the oil, the fiber, the shiv, all of it. You establish manufacturing facilities that make it feasible for farmers to grow more and more hemp.
That's true that Ukrainians are not novices when it comes to hemp production and use. In recent years, even the bill to legalize cannabis use for medical purposes was introduced by the Ukrainian Health Ministry. Hemp is used to mitigate polluted soils around the Chernobyl plant. A Kyiv-based company, Eat Me At, offers meatballs made from hemp. Ukrainian company Hempire produces construction materials made from cannabis, hempcrete, the very thing Todd has in mind when he talks about his strategy. Hempcrete is made of the plant's hard woody core, shiv. It is chopped in small pieces and mixed with water and lime. It's then cured to calcify the bricks, which makes them harder over time. The blocks are light and airy, but they hold the warmth in the winter and keep residents cool in the summer. Mold doesn't grow on it, and it's fire-resistant. To put it simply, this is one of the most innovative construction products that is made out of one of the oldest material known to the humankind. Todd sees a paradigm shift in products like that. There is momentum for hemp to rid itself of all the injustice, for it provides a glimpse into the future, sustainable and efficient. There is also some elegance in it, an old, simple, familiar practice to grow a crop turned into a potent force for global change. The question is, can it work? Is it possible to create an industry that will provide enough building blocks to help Ukraine to quickly recover? Well, some people are already on it.
My name is Michael Marchuk. I'm managing partner and member of the board at Papex Natural Packaging. We're actually a German company, and our core business is production of sustainable packaging through molded fiber technology.
Papex products are made from industrial hemp. The company started small, but with more green policies adopted in Europe, the demand for eco-packaging grew. To save on COGs, Michael and his team turned to a vertical integration strategy. They established a daughter company, Ukrainian Hemp, and started growing 2,300 acres of the crop in Cherkasy, south of Kiev. Today, Mars, the chocolate producer, Procter & Gamble, and Tesla use Papex products. When their business took off, Michael started to think about how he could not only make it more efficient and utilize every part of the plant, but also provide jobs for Ukrainians and reduce environmental damage even further. They built a facility that provides raw cannabis materials and workspaces. Small producers, from vegan leather and tents to protein shakes and meat alternatives, can come and start making things from every part of the plant that is left. Michael's team called the project Ukrainian Hemp Works, and one of the things that comes out of there is hempcrete.
This is one of the easiest forms of industrial hemp usage. It's essentially, hempcrete. Everybody knows crete, what it is. It's not super complicated. It's about going out there and actually, with your hands, building the first house and saying, hey, we did it with the regional resource. It's not only effective, it's actually better than traditional methods like normal crete. It has better organic properties, it has better performance, it's cheaper, it's made from your basically local material. And are you interested? Let's go, let's do it. And let's drive the revolution.
Michael acknowledges that the war changes the needs and priorities of the country, and he feels like hemp will play an essential role in the future. But before new Ukrainian neighborhoods, schools, and hospitals made of hempcrete rise up, there are some hoops to jump.
There are many enthusiasts, like what I can say from my experience, people who are getting in contact with us, Ukrainian Hemp, with our company, are usually very, very, very impressive entrepreneurs, but in a very early stage. Those are people who have brilliant ideas, but absolutely no capital. So basically every discussion runs into, this is our idea to build houses in Ukraine with hemp, but do you know somebody who can invest into this idea? So this is the point, that we don't have enough companies in Europe itself who have the capital to go into Ukraine and say, hey, let's do it.
He also calls for better understanding of cannabis when it comes to lawmakers. The stigma that surrounds the plant may be a serious block in the development of the industry, and it will take time to change. But Todd is more optimistic.
Once governments get over the funny feeling that it gives for them when they talk about cannabis, after they get past their pot puns and their weed jokes and all of that stuff, when we really get down to the serious matter of determining how this industry could be elevated and applied to rebuild this country using products that are carbon negative and trying to rebuild it back in a manner that looks like it did in the past, but functions even better, and help Ukraine evolve from this in some manner. We can change in terms of post-conflict reconstruction.
There is something else worth mentioning. War doesn't simply kill and displace people. It takes away loved ones. It shatters identities and confuses values. And there is no silver bullet for overcoming the pain and grief that flourish in post-war communities. But cannabis can help with that too. Multiple studies have proven that THC, CBD, and other cannabinoids derived from cannabis can help people reduce trauma. War veterans, including Todd, fight for their rights to use cannabis as a medication. For Ukrainians, this can be essential.
People's lives are being ended, destroyed, uprooted. Post-traumatic stress is going to be a generational thing among the Ukrainian nation, right? I see this as an opportunity because there's so much momentum behind it too, right? And even for Ukrainians who are outside of the country, I think it's a great opportunity to learn about hemp and cannabis in the places that they're displaced in.
Cannabis can provide food and shelter, a source of income, and medicine. There's an old Ukrainian legend about how first people got their food and clothes. They mixed tears with Paradise's soil and sowed it. Adam's tears grew into wheat, and Eva's into cannabis. Control Shift was brought to you by Libo Studio and product design agency Humble Team that works with startups and enterprises in all business sectors on land, at sea, and in space. Go to humbleteam.com to learn more. Sound design for this episode was created by Alexei Vorobyov, and also special thanks to Blue Dot Session. The names of everybody who worked on the episode you can find in the description. And I'm your host, Anatoly Gromov. See you in 2 weeks.